The bandwidth for the Wild Paw Dog podcast this week was sponsored by Dougal's Den. www.dougalsden.co.uk. Amazing finds for the furry kind. Hello everybody, I'm John Buskell.
And I'm Karen Wild.
And this is the podcast that gives you help and advice on how to train your dog. It doesn't matter if you're an experienced dog owner, if you've just got your first puppy, or you're thinking about buying a dog. There's something we can all do to make the life we share with our dogs better.
In this week's show, we've got some dogs in the news updates, plus another of our interviews with the training greats of our times. Grisha Stewart is touring the globe with her behaviour adjustment training and has recently released her book detailing how to do it.
So hi Karen, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. There might be a bit of knocking here. I've got my roof being replaced at the moment.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
Cheap fun. Well, tell us about the competition.
Cheap fun, yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, tell us about the competition.
Okay, so we've got a new competition. Mm-hmm. So for the next couple of podcasts, we are going to... Oh, gosh. I don't know, something's just fallen off my desk. For the next couple of podcasts, we're going to ask you a quiz. You have to identify what the dog in the recording is saying. So I want you to see if you can work it out, and we want entries, please. So people need to guess from what they hear, what is this dog saying? And this week's entry is from our stalwart of the podcast, Marley the terrier.
Ooh.
Now, Marley is... Do you know something? I don't know what that is, but it's fallen down there. Oh, don't worry, the dogs aren't under the desk today. They're safe. Yes, Marley is actually recovering. He's been quite poorly, and I would advise you all to go to Marley's blog to find out more about that. And I will put the link on my website for you so you can read all about it and send him some goodwill wishes. He's fine now, but just needs to look after himself. So I thought, in his honour, and because he's such a great fan of the show and writes into us a lot, we're going to do the first quiz with his little voice in it. So I want you to tell me when we play it, what is Marley actually saying?
Okay. All right, then I'll play it right away, Karen. This is just about 14 seconds, so here you go. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Marley. I haven't got a clue what he's saying. Have you, Karen?
I do. I actually know the answer. So yeah, but it's not because I've got any great psychic need. It's just because I actually got it written on an email for me. So if you want to answer, have a guess at what Marley's saying on there, and I believe Lola might be in the background there as well. Please email us on podcast@intellidogs.com, and you might win an intellidogs.com bag, which is a little shopper. Well, it's quite a big shopper that folds up into a little one that you can stick in your pocket, and it says on it, "Because I'm woof it," and nicely embroidered on there. So if you send us an email with your guesses on, and we will read them out next week.
Oh, brilliant. Well, Karen, I see there's some dogs in the news.
Yeah, I wanted to catch up on the news because it's been a while since we've done a kind of a live podcast. I know I've been doing some and you've been doing bits and pieces. There was something that came up in the news that I found absolutely fascinating. You can now get a dog prescribed on the NHS, which is the National Health Service over here in the UK. Yeah. Patients of Harefield Hospital, which is it's part of the cardiac rehabilitation team, are going to be the first ones in the UK to get a dog on prescription. And the Dogs Trust are working with the cardiac team at the hospital to help patients in their final phase of recovery from heart surgery. So the programme is called Hounds Help Hearts, and it is the first of its kind in the country. And what it does, it's brilliant. It encourages patients to walk dogs as part of their recovery. So basically, if you are recovering from some kind of heart problem and you need to exercise gently and need to do it in a certain way, then, it's often that we just end up sitting in front of our desk or, on the computer. And this is a good way of working with dogs in need and taking them for a walk as well. So it's kind of like a rehabilitation with dogs in mind. Don't you think that's really clever, isn't it?
I think that's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. What a great idea.
And also the dogs will surely be grateful for their extra walks and exercise. So, and we've always said, haven't we, on the podcast, that there are massive health benefits of dog ownership. And although we talk very much about the problems that you might have with your dog, it's important that we never just say that is the whole dog. The whole dog is far, far more than the little niggles and problems that we might have. And even with a severe behaviour problem, you're still only talking about a small percentage of the overall dog. And that might sound a bit silly, but really, dogs are just dogs and we are humans and we need to work with them, not against them.
Absolutely.
And look at the whole picture. And so, this is a great thing at Dogs Help with people that feel isolated. They help children with learning difficulties and, through medical detection dogs and charities like that, they can really help us live a better lifestyle. So this is a great chance for that. So I just think brilliant to everyone for introducing that. What a great idea.
Well, Karen, I also understand in other news, the RSPCA, the Royal Society for the Protection of, what's it called?
Prevention of cruelty to animals.
Oh, see, that's the dangers of being across the ocean and away from the UK. I know,
yeah. It's the sentiment rather than the name, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. That's it. The sentiment. Well, I understand they've recently made a report about puppy farming in Wales.
Yes, and this is something that, a lot of us are very, very concerned about because we do see an awful lot of these puppies coming across and they are extremely poor quality dogs. I mean, they really are. The report is called Animal Welfare Indicators Wales. And those of you in the UK will know certain counties in Wales have an extremely bad reputation for being sort of havens for these places where many, many puppies are bred, where they don't get the right socialisation. They're bred as a farm, basically. So they are bred in sort of, buildings that are outbuildings. The bitches are bred over and over again. There's very little control gone into their welfare. There's very few people per number of dogs. It's something like two people per hundreds of dogs. Honestly, it's appalling. Anyway, so this is great. The RSPCA have basically done a whole thing about animal welfare. So it's not just dogs in this report. There are other things. There are, battery hens and that kind of thing, other things going on. But the puppy breeding section highlights that there is a problem and that the RSPCA do have concerns about puppy farming in Wales. And this is something that we have tried to bring awareness to very, very much so. I mean, Mark Abraham, Mark the Vet, as people know him on Twitter, is always talking about it. Ban Puppy Farming is, a big, big organisation. It is, Pup Aid is all about raising awareness. So this is a great move forward from the RSPCA. They have made recommendations in the report so that they can the Welsh Government can then tackle bad practice in the dog breeding industry, because in every industry there is bad practice.
Yeah.
But particularly when it comes to something like this, where you're talking about people that are buying something that could be with them for 15 years, or less, because they generally might end up with behaviour problems or health problems or both. We need to make sure that the puppies we get, if we are decided to get a puppy and not a rescue dog, that they are from a good breeder, that they are from somebody who is properly caring for these dogs. And puppy farms, by their very nature, cannot possibly provide what a puppy needs ready to come and live with a family. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but please do have a look at that report. It's on my website, the link, and any support you can give to the sort of ban puppy farming people, I'll put their links on as well. Please lend your support and thank our lucky stars that the dogs that we've got are not from places like that. But a lot of people do not know that is what they're getting, and they end up in major problems with their puppy. So let's just take the bad breeding out of it if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also a shame because there are reputable breeders, I'm sure, in Wales, of course, and they will get tarred by the same brush.
Absolutely.
Just the fact that they're in Wales, and I think
and responsible breeders, we want to hear from you, because there are lots of responsible breeders whose voices do not get heard. The Animal Welfare Indicators Wales report found nearly 2,000 dog breeding establishments in Wales. Now, are they all puppy farming establishments? Probably not. But we need to have some kind of system where those that are responsible really get highlighted. So, if you've got an opinion on that, please let us know.
Well, it's time for the main item. And today we've got an interview with Grisha Stewart. For those people that don't know who Grisha is, Karen, why don't you tell them?
Oh, well, Grisha is very well known to the sort of dog training fraternity. She is from the US, and she has she runs her own training school, and obviously she tells you more about that on the interview. But Grisha has just released her book about her whole sort of I don't know what to call it, a system, a way of life, I don't know, that you should have with your dogs. Now, it's called BAT, B-A-T, which stands for Behaviour Adjustment Training. And it works with all dogs for lots of things, but it is aimed at, fear, frustration, aggression in dogs. And it is a way of making sure that, you give the rewards that the dog most wants, and you reward calm behaviour and give the dog plenty of choices to make, rather than making the choice of behaving in an aggressive way. So when we look at the way that this is trained or taught, you're looking at the dog offering behaviours that are more acceptable to us. And I'll let Grisha tell you more about it. Obviously, she's she is the expert on this. There are a lot of similarities with the kind of desensitization and counter conditioning training that goes along. But the thing that I really like about this, and particularly, and this is an unashamed plug for the book, it is like a kind of textbook for a trainer or an owner to really get down to the baseline of what your dog is doing, thinking, how they're behaving, what to look out for. And it's very helpful, and you shouldn't ignore that. If you do get the chance to go and see Grisha in action and learn from her, she's extremely approachable, and she's doing courses over here and in the States. There's another course coming up, I believe, next year here in February, and I will post the link for that on the site. I'm not paid to say this. I just think about time we need practical courses so that we can go as trainers and just rehearse and remind ourselves of what to do, and to look at the new angles and say, you don't need to have a food reward. You can have what's called, all rewards are functional, but a functional reward, something the dog is directly seeing as a benefit to them. And often that can be getting away from the thing that's scary, but in a controlled way. It's hard to explain. I tried to keep the interview between the technical side, which me as a total geek would love, and the owner side as well, so that owners can listen to this podcast and think, right, yeah, that sounds really good. I might give that a go. And I do think that fundamentally and long term, it's the sort of thing that we should be doing with our dogs at any point where they spook or get frustrated or, anything like that. This is a very practical, step-by-step way of getting it working. And I really like it for that reason. If nothing else, I think that has got to be well worth a look.
All right, Karen, let's give the interview a listen then.
So, Grisha, now, we've just been chatting about this and the difference between behaviourist and trainer over here to over there. Now, you're a trainer specialising in aggression, is that right?
That's correct. So I work on the prevention and rehabilitation of reactivity, including aggression, fear, and all that good stuff.
And you're qualified, you have an MA, don't you, in CPDT-KA, so you do really know what you're talking about.
I feel like I do. You can always learn more. My master's is actually in mathematics. I was pursuing a PhD and decided that I'd rather go teach. And then I decided I'd rather fall in love with training dogs. And so the problem solving and critical thinking that I got from the mathematics definitely applies. But I'm also getting my second master's now in integrative studies and psychology with an emphasis in animal behavior.
Mm-hmm. So how did you get from one to the other? How did you get into dog training?
I grew up with dogs. I think at one point we had 20 dogs at my house.
20?
But 20, yeah. My parents were not especially responsible with spay and neuter. So we lived in the country and we had a lot of dogs. But fast forward, in college, I got my first dog as an adult. And that summer I read about 50 training books and started volunteering. And so I've been training professionally since 2003.
So I was looking at your website actually for your dog training school, and I realised that actually I was looking at the different things you cover. You cover a huge amount of areas of dog training, don't you? From all kinds of areas, puppies. You've got sort of advanced puppies, junior type dogs. You've got adult dogs that are beginners, and then there was all sorts of walks and different things that you do. Do you have a favourite part of that you like to do, like for yourself personally?
Well, personally now, the main thing that I focused on is doing individual consults for reactivity or separation anxiety, kind of the bigger issues. I have 5 trainers, and so I miss the puppy classes, but I can't have the structure of having to teach every week now that I'm traveling and giving talks all over. So definitely my favorites would be the puppy class and the reactivity work.
You cannot beat a puppy class, can you? Or a one-to-one with the puppy is even better. So from a trainer point of view, just asking generically, I mean, I want to come on to BAT, otherwise known as behaviour adjustment training. But before we do that, I'm asking every trainer and every person that's experienced with dogs that I speak to on the podcast, are there 5 things? What 5 things do you think everyone should teach their dog that you would really say, okay, cannot live without? What would your 5 be?
All right. Well, I haven't pre-planned my list of 5, but I would say
just off the top of your head,
attention.
it's fine. Uh-huh.
Yeah, off the top of my head would be attention. So an automatic check-in is probably the most important. A recall, where you can call them on cue. Socialization. So getting used to people, adults, kids, all the various other dogs, things like that. And house training. That's one of the main things that people give up their dogs for, is that they're not house trained. That was 4, I think.
You don't have to have 5.
All right, and I think yeah. And then polite walking, I think, is one of the other ones, or just politely interacting.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's funny.
And I actually. Oh, go ahead.
No, carry on.
Oh, I just finished filming a DVD about puppy training and socialization, and I sort of had to think through what are the most important things. And so on the DVD, I left out things like teaching sit or teaching down or whatever, because those are things that I think that are nice to have and easy enough to teach. But I think the ones that people overlook are things like the default attention. And I really love the touch cue as a recall command. So teaching puppies to touch their nose to a target like your hand. Being able to move them around without having to lift them, I think, is really helpful.
Oh yeah, that's a really good idea. In fact, just as I sort of semi-interrupted you, but I was about to say, it's really interesting that you haven't got a list of sit, stand, down, heel, and because everyone seems to be coming up with these sorts of answers now, which is great, because I honestly believe if you'd have asked trainers sort of maybe 5-10 years ago, you would have got a list like, okay, they have to have a sit and they have to have
so competition skills.
Yeah. And things to involve family dogs rather than just kind of obedience kind of exercises, more competition style is people definitely moving away from that, I think, in dog training. So let's move on to onto sort of, I suppose, this main topic today, which is behaviour adjustment training, also known as BAT. Now, how would you describe BAT to somebody?
BAT is a method that teaches dogs that they have options. So it's a way to help dogs gain confidence and social skills by noticing, the human is noticing the various ways that dogs are communicating. So they're noticing that the dog is turning its head away or sniffing the ground or saying, I need a little bit of space, and then not requiring that the dog go all the way to, say, aggression before we notice. So it's a way to both prevent aggression in puppies as well as rehabilitate aggression or reactivity or frustration in adult dogs.
Now, I noticed on your site that you described it as a low stress way of teaching. So how does that, that is something that I've quite often come across where we've seen in the past ways where dogs can be rehabilitated and that kind of thing have involved a lot of stress and a lot of frustration and a lot of flooding. So BAT doesn't do that.
No, absolutely not. So flooding would basically be putting the dog in a position where they are overly stressed, so they're pacing, panting, barking, whatever, and then they're not able to get out until they are all the way relaxed. And so whereas with BAT, or even something like with cat, where they might be put over threshold and then they're looking for some small behavior. With cat, I know they're not purposely put over threshold, but with BAT, we're absolutely avoiding putting the dog over threshold. So if we make a mistake and the dog is too close to the trigger, so they are starting to look stressed or like they will have a reaction, then the humans would help them out. So we call them back, we maybe shift our weight, we do something that helps the dog refocus away from the trigger and help calm themselves down. By low stress, I mean that we're honoring the dog's needs the whole time.
So effectively, let's sort of, so we kind of jumped ahead to the whole thing. If we broke it down for someone, I mean, I've seen it, and I'm obviously met you at one of your seminars, and I found it absolutely fascinating the way that it was handled. And I think that's a really important part of what you're describing, is how it's handled. It's not just looking for the dog to do this or training the dog to do that. You're actually assessing all the time and monitoring what's going on. So let's pick up an example. So we would be talking about, for example, a dog that cannot go near other dogs, which I know a lot of our listeners, have told me they have problems with. So say your dog starts to go absolutely crazy when it sees another dog, wherever it sees it, maybe in the street, as an example. How would you start to, and I mean, obviously you can't describe the whole process, but how would you describe BAT as working in that scenario?
Okay, so try to give the 30-second version
Yeah,
of the 2 days.
I appreciate that.
But basically, so let's describe what a setup might look like. So if we have a dog who's reactive to other dogs, then we might, let's say that dog barks or lunges or whatever at 20 meters. So then we might be working at 25 or 30 or at some distance where the dog is able to be comfortable. So they're able to just barely notice the other dog. So the other dog is important to them. They've popped out of the environment, but they're not so strong that the dog is having to be really stressed. And again, this could be like maybe your dog normally reacts at 2 meters away, and so you'd be working at 5. You're working a certain distance where the dog can handle it, and the other dog is arranged to be working with you. So it's a friend with their dog or whatever. And then with your dog, you approach toward we call it the trigger or the decoy. So you're approaching toward the decoy. And then you stop at some distance. You wait until the dog notices the other dog. They look away. So they're allowed to gather information. They're there to sniff and check it out and make sure it's safe. And then at some point they look away or do something that disconnects. So they're engaging and then they're disengaging. And right at the moment that they disengage, you say yes to tell the dog that they're correct, and then walk them away as the reinforcement. The idea is that most dogs are reactive, not to sort of say, come over here and be my friend, but as a way to say, go away, you scare me, whatever. So we're using that as a reinforcement. That feeling that you get when you're in the elevator with somebody and you don't like them and then they walk out, that feeling of relaxation is what we're using as the reinforcement.
So you mentioned distance. So obviously distance is key in the sense that you have to assess at which point the dog is going to react and not going to react before you set it up. Is that right?
Exactly. And then it's all about repetition at a level that the dog can handle and enjoy. And so instead of just walking away, sometimes we're jogging away, we're petting after we leave, we're praising the dog. It's a very interactive process, and it's an active process for both the handler and the dog, so that they're feeling like they're in control of the situation again without needing to be aggressive.
One of the things that really struck me, and I've just, for people that want to see it in action, there is you have done some DVDs, haven't you?
I do. There's like a introduction DVD that's about an hour and a half, and then there are 2 more DVDs, one that's for home viewers called Organic Socialization, and then another that's a full day seminar. And we're actually filming in September. There will be a 2-day seminar DVD as well. So
basically people can see it, because it's always hard to describe it, isn't it? I mean, I think you've described it quite well, in the sense that you've got to think about how the dog is thinking. What I was going to say was the thing that really struck me, and it always strikes me whenever I do any kind of training with a reactive dog, is if it's working if nothing is happening. But it doesn't have to be nothing. It has to be just enough and then not too much. And I do believe, and I don't know if you've found this, but sometimes people feel that you have to see the dog react and then stop. But I don't actually feel that that's the case. You don't want this kind of absolutely over the top reaction to then stop, because that is more suppression type training, is it not?
Absolutely. And it should be sort of like watching paint dry, except for the exciting part where you run away and it's fun.
Yeah.
But in terms of the dog's behavior, it should be pretty boring. We actually, one of the not issues, but one of the things that happens in our Growly dog class, it's a 6-week class, and we have different dogs coming on different weeks, different pairs of dogs, and then all the dogs come at once at the end. And what happens in that class is that the students start to feel that, my dog is much worse than these dogs. As soon as I bring my dog in, they'll know that I have the only really aggressive dog in this class. And then we bring their dog in, and the same exact thing happens, because we're setting them up for success. I know this because I was actually reading through a blog of one of the students who was worried as the weeks went on that her dog was going to be far more reactive than everyone else's. And And of course it wasn't, because that's what we do, is we set them up to be able to succeed.
Yeah. And that's something that really comes into it, is how we feel about our own dog. As an owner, if you've got a problem and you come in for help, you have to be feeling pretty bad about it generally. And then to be in a class situation, I find a lot of people have maybe been in a class situation where their dog has been, the only dog that's barked, the only puppy that won't interact, the only one that wants to hide under the chair or whatever. And then they isolate themselves because in a class situation like that, it's probably not the right environment for that particular dog at that time. And then they almost set themselves up for, well, I can't go anywhere, I can't do anything. So that's something that BAT must really help with, mustn't it?
Definitely. Yeah. And this concept of I'm not the only one with a reactive dog is helpful. I think that's one of the benefits of a group class where you work on aggression, is this sort of support group feel. But we also have, we have a troubled teens class that we just got started this year. And that's, like you mentioned, the only puppy, that doesn't interact well with other dogs. Having that definitely, sort of coaching the puppies through it much more slowly as teenagers that were sort of unable to thrive in the puppy class. We have lots of people that either didn't take a puppy class or they took it elsewhere or whatever. And then we do this troubled teens class where they're able to gain confidence more slowly and take everything more easily, more barriers, things like that. Definitely is helpful.
So you're using BAT as the backbone of that sort of training, the distance thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
You see that I think, as I know that we do have trainers that listen to the show as well. And that's something that quite often is reported to me, and it's something I think I said to you when I met you, was that, to be able to put this into a group environment wouldn't even have crossed my mind. But what you've actually done, I think I saw on the videos that you showed, where you set people up and they work out their own distance threshold for their dog, so they know how far away their dog has to be after the initial sessions with you. And then when they're working with another dog that's also reactive, am I right, they kind of play it off against each other, so that they know, okay, your dog is too close for my dog to cope with, but my dog can do this, and your dog can stay still and be distracted, and it works very much as a mutual exercise. Is that right? Have I got that right?
You have, yep. And so it makes it easier to find volunteers to work with, because they also need other dogs to work with to practice. And so you can work with two reactive dogs at the same time that way. And so that works, with private lessons. I have clients bring in their hook up with each other, so that we have two clients that we're working on at the same time. But also in the growly dog class, and then just separate from me as well. They seem to really catch on to this in terms of what they're looking for.
So because one of the things that I think is also a problem is that if you have a stooge dog, what we call a stooge dog, a decoy, that sometimes it can be quite hard on them if they have a dog that's aggressive or not giving the right social signals. If you're using two dogs of a similar type, in some ways, I guess you're never getting any of the dogs over threshold anyway. So there's no dog has to be faced by a kind of barking reactive dog. Is that how it works? Right.
I mean, yeah. So we don't have barking reactive dogs in this unless somebody has made a mistake, and so it's not like they're constantly exposed to a barrage of barking. And definitely, I mean, when we're working, we tend to be like, if you were doing, say, counter conditioning with treats versus BAT, we tend to be working farther away because there isn't a distraction of treats, and so we're definitely even more careful about threshold because we don't have something that we can sort of just shove in the dog's face. We do use treats for certain parts of BAT. I didn't describe that, but on walks and things we do. Yeah. But in terms of setups, we don't tend to use treats, and so we are a little bit further away at first, and the gains that we make are more real. But back to your point about this being difficult for the possibility of it being difficult for the decoy dog, I would say even if you're doing counter conditioning, having the decoy dog actually doing BAT as well is really helpful. So not just sort of forcing them to stand there as the other dog stares or whatever, but recognizing that if your decoy or your stooge dog looks away, that they may also require some distance. So honoring their needs as well during this process.
So we talked about stress signals, didn't we, and about making it low stress. So if you were to describe to somebody what kind of early signals they'd be looking for, what would you ask your clients to be looking for, and what do you get owners to look for when you know the dog is just starting to think they're not terribly happy, but they're kind of okay, manageable? What are you looking for in the dog?
I'm looking for so like things like scanning, so they're looking around a little bit too frequently, or they might be breathing hard. So they're panting. It's sort of a dry pant, and they're not actually hot, and they haven't been exercising. Their pupils might be a little bit more dilated. They might be a little bit more stiff. Their muscles are not quite as movable as they were before. So watching for little signs like that. I actually just had so I have a book coming out that's in September and October, somewhere in there it'll come out. And I just required the illustrator at the last minute to draw me up about 3 pages of stress signals, because I realized that this really critical piece had been left out of the book. So there's a ton of different things that dogs can do that sort of give you information that they're not feeling comfortable. And different dogs will do different ones. And so I'm kind of coaching through for a particular dog what to look for.
Do you know, with some breeds, I mean, where you see some dogs do not give very much away. And particularly if they've perhaps had some kind of suppression training in the past, by that I mean, they've been allowed to react and then punished for reaction. So therefore, they kind of keep their body signals a little bit quiet, and they don't do very much, and they very rarely growl. What do you really then fine tune what you're looking for and describe that to the owner?
Mm-hmm. Right. And actually what happens as a result of that is that they start to give bigger body language. They start to become a little bit easier to read as time goes on, and makes it more predictable for the owner as well. So, it's kind of cool watching them open up. They're looking for, at first we might just be looking for weight shifts or, little tongue flicks or whatever, but then the dog starts to do a little bit more, be a little bit more obvious with their body language as time goes on, because they realize that they're not getting punished for those things. Yeah,
so they're kind of allowed to do it and allowed to show, I'm not so happy here. And then having it recognised must be quite a big, almost like a relief for them, because it is not just about the dog. I think the dog is, from what I saw, the dog is allowed to do things pretty much by themselves and show things by themselves, but the owner is there to back that up.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. The dog's responsibility is to speak dog, and it's our responsibility to notice.
So really the responsibility is in not putting the dog under too much pressure from our point of view. What happens if, say you have an owner and they've been doing that, and they, obviously it's fairly accessible for most people, but they then turn around and say to you, okay, which is what happens with counter conditioning as well. Okay, but I want to walk my dog down the street, and there might be dogs walking down the street towards me or whatever. What happens there? What do you say? Do you say carry on and just do bat, or do you say avoid that situation, or how does it work?
Well, it depends on the dog. So if you're able to use, so we do what's called stage 1 and stage 2, and if you go to the functionalrewards.com website, it describes there's a handout that describes the different stages. But so there's different things that you can do involving treats that make it so that you can go to more places than you could if you were just sort of walking around and waiting for good behavior. But there are times and dogs and situations where the dog just is going to go over threshold, and so I usually advise avoiding those situations until the dog is ready for that. Mm-hmm. And if that means doing more setups more quickly so that the dog is ready sooner, then that's what I'll encourage.
Okay, so when you say setup, an actual deliberate training exercise.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Uh-huh. A setup is sort of like for people who don't know that yet, a setup is sort of like a dress rehearsal where the dog is able to practice what to do over and over and over and over again. And gradually then you're moving closer and closer to the trigger and getting more and more friendly.
So, I mean, bat sounds quite, it sounds very natural, and I don't want to overdo the kind of terminology with it, because I think that dog trainers are often accused of getting very technical with their training, and I think that can put people off. So do you think bat needs a lot of skill, or can anyone do it?
I have very few clients who come to me who are not able to handle the whole bat thing. I think humans are not born knowing how to read dog body language, but it's not rocket science. So I think I tend to phrase it in terms of elevators a couple of ways. And one is, if you're in an elevator with somebody that's feeling uncomfortable, or if you're in an elevator and you're feeling uncomfortable, what are the sort of things that you might do? You might turn your head away. You might bite your fingernails, which is a grooming behavior. You might, turn your body away from them. You might distract yourself with a cell phone. And so there's lots of commonality. And I think that, so people do catch up onto that pretty well. And I also think that, so like with my clients, I usually go through kind of a series of about anywhere from 1 to 5 sessions, depending on the person, but they all seem to get the whole concepts pretty well. So the one piece that I think is the hardest for them is how slowly you have to go, not slowly, but how detailed you have to be in terms of going through different scenarios. So, just yesterday I was working with a client where we were working on the doorway, working on getting a person to be able to come in the door without getting bitten by the dog. And, we had a muzzle on, and obviously we were working below threshold, but the whole point was to teach the dog not to be reactive at the door. And so it was interesting because the client looked at me one point and said, we're done. The dog is being friendly. And I said, well, she hasn't gotten inside yet. and as soon as she put one foot on the threshold, the dog started barking again. And so just this concept of, you need to be very, very careful with splitting your criteria. And that's something that does not come naturally to people. And so that's the lesson, no matter what kind of positive training you're using, to be able to split criteria like that is important.
So kind of feeling for it rather than getting lots of charts out. I imagine, it's more a case of following through right to the end of a behaviour or a desired sort of goal. So, you want to walk right through the door as you describe. Okay, we've got to do every last step.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I'm not saying, all the technical jargon, but I'm going through behaviorally what the people need to be doing, and I'm shaping them into the concepts.
Yeah, so teaching the people as well, as we always do. And what do you see if the dog is helped by the BAT process? What do you see in the dog? What's your sort of goal outcome, and that you see yourself? Where does it end, if you like?
It depends on the dog, but like my dog, for example, is now a therapy dog. He's a dog that was reactive to people at about 100 feet away. He would bark in an alarm at adults, children, other dogs, whatever. And now he can go into a assisted living home and have people pet him and enjoy it. And so it can be like that. It can be that the dog is walking past other dogs and not saying hello. It depends on the person and their goals. And if the dog has a damaging bite history, then all of the goals might be involving, that they don't ever 100% trust, but that they might be putting the dog in kind of normal situations like I just described, but wearing a muzzle. And so it just depends on.
Sorry, what about the risk of, spontaneous recovery where a dog will suddenly go back and do something again? Is that, because BAT is obviously quite a sort of gradual process, do you find that happens from time to time, or does it just not happen?
I haven't seen it, but BAT started in officially sort of being named that in 2009. And so, the last 2 years of that, I haven't seen any spontaneous recovery of the problem behaviors. But I think it's such a gradual process, and it's such a natural process. It's dogs relearning their own communication that it keeps getting reinforced as time goes on. So it's not like the training has stopped one day where they're not getting treats anymore or they're not getting corrections anymore. They are continually being reinforced by being able to walk away or having the other people pet them and then go away. So it just keeps going, just like a regular dog would be able to continue their communication. It's the same concept.
So that's really interesting. I should have explained for those who don't know the jargon. That's my mistake. Spontaneous recovery is where a dog suddenly jumps back to a behaviour that it used to do before. So say, for example, if it used to bark and lunge, that it seems okay, and then suddenly goes back to that barking and lunging behaviour. So fundamentally then, when you say about the dog hasn't got treats anymore or whatever, it sounds like the BAT sort of relearning process is a self-perpetuating process, because it's then reinforced by other dogs or perhaps by people or by the owner still keeping it going, which is something that, does counter conditioning do that, or is that something that where it again fundamentally differs?
I think that some of the permanent gains that you can see from counter conditioning are actually sort of an accidental learning of that we do deliberately through BAT, so that the counter conditioning gets them to a point where they're comfortable, and then their behaviors get reinforced in the same way that we're setting them up to be reinforced by BAT. So that's my theory. When you don't have spontaneous recovery with counter conditioning, it's because of this kind of learning.
Oh, yeah, that's really well described. Grisha, it's been brilliant talking to you today. Now, I know that I've looked at your course schedule. You are all over the world. It's amazing. I know you're coming back over here to the UK. Is that in August to do another course? Am I right? To do another seminar?
That's right. And actually, I found out that there's only 2 spots left. So we have about 200 people in the 2 locations. And so basically by the time that it will be full.
So get yourself on the waiting list for that one. If they can't
right.
get it over here in the UK, then I know you're travelling around. There's details of that on your website, which I will put the links for your site and everything on my blog. And you've mentioned the DVDs. You've also got a book, which I believe has had some very high accolades. Am I right?
Yes, I'm very excited. I feel like I'm getting my final exam grades in this week. So
yeah, some great comments from some great people. Yeah,
Anderson. Yep.
Yeah, amazing. Some
great.
Some fantastic reinforcement there for you, and also, the very fact that what you're doing is so accessible, it's so straightforward, it makes perfect sense when you think about it. You think, I can see how that works, and therefore I think people really buy into it very quickly. You're not going through a whole procedural explanation that involves give the treat here or do this, do that. I noticed as well just before we finished that you were using clickers on the course that I was on. Is that again to mark a behaviour, or is it just because the client wants to do it, or do you think it has a significance that of its own for using that?
I think the clicker comes in really handily with so we use that for stage 1 and stage 2 when we are using food. We use the clicker as a marker. I think it has two effects. It marks the behavior really well, but it also, in the way that we use it, prompts the next behavior, which is turning back to the owner. So it's actually it's really useful, and I think of that as a clicker training protocol, but using this concept of distance as a reward for a part of it, as well as bonus rewards of food or treats or toys or whatever for other parts.
So you can kind of build one on top of the other without any ill effects.
Correct.
Yeah. And I guess as well, step it up according to the stimulus, what you've got in front of you. If you've got something that's quite difficult for the dog to cope with, say for example your decoy dog starts to bark or whatever, you can bring out something better every time.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, it's definitely, you're applying the whatever version of the protocol suits the situation.
Yeah. So a lot more flexible and a lot easier to use than some things that we can do, and certainly a lot easier for the dog, certainly a lot more relaxing for everyone. Like you say, when nothing's happening, that's all good. The things that you're looking for are quite specific.
Yeah, I think that the owners of the reactive dogs actually learn quite a lot in terms of relaxation as well. They're not just working on the dog's behavior, but their own comfort level with the situation.
Yeah. And I saw that with my own eyes, and I can be a complete witness to that. That when I was on the seminar, there was a girl, wasn't there, and she'd got a dog that had been basically beaten up by another dog, and she was very nervous of what her dog might do, and the fact that the dog didn't really do anything and actually did show these behaviours and chose to look away and was given the opportunity to move away. You just saw her kind of grow in confidence as the day went on, and to me that really was significant, because once she decided that, then all of a sudden she was interacting with the dog in a much more relaxed way, and I think the dog just picked up on that as well. So it really enhances the teamwork. Do you think it really helps that with an owner and their dog?
I do. And really teamwork is where it's at. I mean, we get dogs because we want them to be part of our family. We don't get them so that we can ignore them or punish them or whatever. We want them to be on the same team as us, and they really like that too.
Grisha, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been brilliant talking to you. As I say, I will put all the links on there. So if people want to contact you, do you have an email address that they can find out more about BAT on?
If they go to the website, that would be the best way, functionalrewards.com. There's also a Yahoo group on there, a discussion list, and so if they have any questions, they can post to that, or they can also find me on Facebook.
On Facebook as Grisha Stewart.
Exactly. Yep.
Lovely. Grisha, thank you so much.
Well, thanks for doing that, Karen. I think that's great. I've just had a look up in Amazon here, amazon.co.uk, and if you're interested in finding the book, Behaviour Adjustment Training, BAT, for fear, frustration and aggression in dogs, it's out in paperback, and the current price is just over £11 in the UK, and it says here there's only one left in stock. So order soon.
Well, you can actually get it from...
Go on.
You can actually get it from... dogwise.com, who's the publisher. And if you look on there, again, what I'm going to do is put the links up on the page for this. I mean, I sound very excited, very enthusiastic, because I just think the whole thing about rehabilitation of dogs is when you leave it too late, you end up with a problem, or you're not aware that the problem is developing until it becomes really bad. And then people struggle. They don't know what to do. The dog ends up making you dead miserable as an owner, or going into rescue or something like that. Now, I've seen it with my own eyes where you can get the dog rehabilitated. It takes time and it takes effort, but it's not that difficult. I think the way Grisha describes it is so straightforward, and I really value that. I think it's a terrific, sensible, can-do attitude, and I really like that. I like that about Grisha very much. She's very sort of can-do, and that you've got to value that in people. I think it's great.
Okay, so just to remind you, we're not on affiliate links or anything there for Grisha's book. We're just excited doggy people. So that's about it for this week. If you have any comments about the show or Grisha's interview, please get in touch. You can contact Karen on Twitter, and you'll find her at twitter.com/wildpaw. And you'll find me at twitter.com/John Buskell. You can send us an email. Remember, if you can work out what Marley was saying, to podcast@intellidogs.com. And we would love it if you like the show, if you wrote us a review on iTunes. It's one of the best ways of finding the show. And if you're looking for more in-depth training advice, why not build your own dog training manual tailored to your needs? And that's at Karen's website at intellidogs.com. To inquire about web design or online marketing services, including podcasts, why not get in touch with me? And you'll find me at jontusmedia.com/contact. So until next time, remember, be nice to your woofs. Bye.
Bye.
The Wild Paw Dog Podcast this week was sponsored by Dougal's Den, dougalsden.co.uk. Amazing finds for the furry kind.